This is the remastered version of part 3 of my series on Marquis Smith in the Fall. And again, I'm just going to reiterate that I'm doing this to not only add more video clips, but to give a better vocal recording as well. So please enjoy. After Brick's departure, Smith would continue the Fall through the 90s, into the millennium, and right up until his death in 2018. Smith's first album post-Bricks was Extricate. This album continued with the use of electronics, and the song Telephone Thing was remixed by the electronic duo Cold Cut. The song had a similar sound to the bands of the Manchester scene of the late 80s, such as the Stone Roses or the Happy Mondays. Elements of hip-hop scratching were incorporated into the song.
I hear you telephone thing, listen and L. I hear you telephone thing, listen and L.
Smith on the album also tries singing on the beautiful yet sad Bill Is Dead, where he declares that this is the greatest time in my life. One gets the feeling that he was maybe trying to come to terms with the breakup with Bricks.
This times of my life. This is the finest time of my life. These are the greatest times of my life.
Martin Brama, who was one of the original members, was brought back in, but he only stuck around for that album. Over the course of the early and mid-90s, The Fall would continue to produce several albums that kept incorporating electronics with their dirgy guitar sound. Shiftwork, Code Selfish, The Infotainment Scan, and Middle Class Revolt. What was really interesting was Smith's desire to cover songs. On Shiftwork, Smith covers White Lightning, which was written by the Big Bopper, but was really made famous by the country great George Jones.
In North Carolina, way back in the hills, there lived my pappy and he had him a still. They brewed White Lightning till the sun go down.
On Code Selfish, they recorded a cover of Hank Williams Sr.'s song, Just Waiting.
Waiting for Olivia to come, and the young singers waiting to sing.
On the Infotainment Scan, the band covers the disco classic by Sister Sledge, Lost in Music, a novelty song called I'm Going to Spain, and Why Are People So Grudgeful by the famous reggae musician and producer Lee Scratch Perry.
I lost the music, feel so alive.
On Middle Class Revolt, they cover War by Henry Cow, Junkman by the Groundhogs, and Shut Up by the experimental 60s garage rock rockers, The Monks, whose song I Hate You and Oh How Do You Now they covered on Extricate under the titles Black Monk Times Parts 1 and 2. The band recorded Extricate, Code Selfish, and Shiftwork on the label Fontana, while Infotainment Scan and Middle Class Revolt were released on Permanent Records in the UK and famous indie label Matador in the United States. Bricks returned for the tour for Middle Class Revolt, but Smith and her did not rekindle their relationship. In fact, she was shocked by Smith's appearance. He looked like he had aged decades in just a few years. Smith was drinking copious amounts of alcohol and continuing to abuse amphetamines.
No, I'm not ashamed. I like a beer. No, I don't think there's anything fucking... I think the worst thing is when people drink under the table, to be quite frank.
Smith was also becoming more unreasonable, and his erratic behavior was well documented in the British music mags. I remember seeing The Fall at RPM in Toronto in 1994, and Smith certainly looked worse for wear. Bricks would remain in the band and record the 1995 album Cerebral Caustic. The album starts out with the dynamic The Joke, which remained a regular in Fall live gigs in years to come.
The Joke.
Brick's influence was apparent in songs like Don't Call Me Darling and Feeling Numb, a song where Smith describes the effects that the antidepressant Prozac had on him. The album also features the experimental Bonkers in Phoenix, a cover of the Frank Zappa song I'm Not Satisfied, and a re-recording of the 1990 B-side Life Just Bounces.
Bonkers at Phoenix, bonkers at Phoenix, bonkers at Phoenix.
Later in 1995, the band would record the single, The Chislers. During the recording of the single, Smith fired longtime guitarist Craig Scallion. He would later admit that his drinking was affecting his judgment.
The Chislers.
1996's The Light User Syndrome was the last album with Bricks. She would end up walking out during the tour, and bassist Stephen Handley would describe a concert in Worthington as the worst gig ever. The follow-up album, Levitate, was recorded under extreme tension. The band owed a VAT bill that had accrued interest over the 80s and 90s, and now was £200,000. Drummer Carl Burns returned despite being fired after the recording of The Light User Syndrome. Levitate probably contains their most unique cover song. Smith decided to cover the comedic 1959 song, I'm a Mummy, by voice actor Bobby McFadden.
I'm a mummy. I scare people. Watch what happens when I walk up to somebody.
But a complete disaster was unfolding. The VAT bill almost resulted in Smith and Handley having their houses repossessed. Smith fired the whole band when they were in Ireland, only to rehire them a few days later. Then things would explode at a gig in New York City. Most of the band walked off stage 3 days earlier at a Philadelphia gig, leaving Smith and current girlfriend Julia Nagel playing on stage together. At the gig at Brownies on the Lower East Side of New York City on April 7th, 1998, things exploded on stage. Smith started messing with Carl Burns' drum kit, which started a physical fight between Smith and the band. The fight continued at the hotel, with Smith and Nagel getting physical with each other, and eventually the police were called. Smith was arrested and spent 2 days at Rikers. With the exception of Julia Nagel, the rest of the band quit, including Carl Burns, who had been in and out of the band since 1977, and Stephen Handley, who had been in the band since 1979. Smith was ordered by the judge to go through an anger management course. Smith claims, after leaving Rikers, to have had a premonition of the two towers coming down on September 11th, 2001. He stated to a policeman that the buildings didn't have a proper joist and could come down at some point. Nagel and Smith reconciled, and she helped him form a new band. The Marshall Suite was released in 1999 and would begin an 18-year journey where Smith would record albums with ever-changing lineups of the band. Often these albums would have more of a garage rock feel to them. Interest in the band was growing, and Smith's unique musical vision was praised by musical enthusiasts. Henry Rollins would often play fall tracks on his radio show, Harmony in My Head.
Mark Smith really is that guy who you really hoped you could be. Like, if you're in a band, you really don't want to care what anyone thinks, but you do. And you really want to be able to crank out a record every 9 months, but you can't. And you'd love to keep surprising people and kind of baffling your critics by, every 3 albums or so turning out your best album.
In 2004, the BBC would produce a documentary examining the Fall called The Wonderful and Frightening World of Marky Smith. In 2014, 3 Danish Fall fans released the documentary It's Not Repetition, It's Discipline. Smith would produce some amazing tracks over this period. One that stands out is The Hypnotic Blindness from the 2005 album Fall Heads Roll.
Welcome, living legend.
Smith would marry Greek-German Elena Pulau, who would join the band. She would unfortunately eventually leave Smith in 2016. 66 musicians were in the Fall over the course of the band's history. Even though it was kind of a Marquis Smith solo act because he was always in the group, members' pay may have been better than if these albums were released under Smith's name alone. Smith saw himself as running the band like a work crew on a building site. Smith used to keep the band's wages in a bag and distribute them by hand rather than going through check or bank transfer. Smith got a lot of admiration because right up to the time of his death, he insisted on producing new music and making music the focus of his concerts rather than the old material. Many bands would tour on their hits from yesteryear, but Smith refused to do that. The downside of his approach was his stubborn and irrational behavior that made him difficult to work with.
Oh, sorry, Kevin. In my headphones, it sounds like fucking the Smurfs. It doesn't sound anything like the track I've heard.
And there was also his addictions. Years of heavy smoking, alcoholism, and amphetamine abuse would eventually catch up with Smith. He developed a number of health problems and would eventually develop cancer in the lungs and kidneys. He came on stage in a wheelchair on November 4th, 2017 to perform. On January 24th, 2018, Marquis Smith passed away. Tributes came in from numerous artists: Liam Gallagher, Billy Bragg, Suede's Brett Anderson, Elastica's Justine Frischman, Garbage, Superchunk, Henry Rollins, the Pixies, and numerous others. After all they had been through, Brick still considered Mark to be her soulmate. Smith created one of the most unique music groups of the late 20th century. The way he used narration, stream of consciousness, repetitive choruses, and all done in a working-class Manchurian elocution was unbelievable. Indie rockers today emulate the jagged rhythms of the Fall, and their music has a quality that feels as relevant today as when it was produced. Marquis Smith was a visionary artist who refused to compromise. There will never again be a figure in music quite like him.
I'm riding third class on a one-class train. I'm sort of not like a winded crane on a big pole threads.
Thank you for watching 20th Century Music and Arts. Please continue to like, subscribe, comment, and share. I hope you have enjoyed my remastered version of this series on Marquis Smith in the Fall, and I hope you continue to check out my new videos. I am going to continue to remaster old ones, and I'm also going to be producing some new material soon. Thank you for watching and listening. Bye-bye.